So first of all, welcome. I'm Maggie Augustine, and I will be the moderator today. And just a few housekeeping items before we jump right on in. You are in listen mode only because we are recording this, and we will deliver this to you within the next week so you can share this and review it at your convenience. So you will be in listen mode only, but that doesn't mean we don't want you to participate. We want you to ask questions. We want you to chat with each other. So feel free at any point to use the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen to ask questions, and we will have a portion of the webinar at the very end to answer those. So Cara and Amy can tackle those at the end. So today's session is Recognizing and Moving Beyond Implicit Bias in the Workplace. And our speakers are Cara Silletto and Amy Waninger. And yes, welcome them both. And just also, if you, at the end of this, if you're like, I need more resources for that, Amy's website is leadatanylevel.com, so you can visit that, and also crescendostrategies.com. But as you will kind of start seeing, we are in the process of changing our name. So for now, WeReduceTurnover.com is the best place for you to get more resources on retention. So that's a little spoiler alert for the upcoming week. So but now I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Amy. So Amy C. Waninger is the CEO of Lead at Any Level, and she works with organizations that want to build diverse leadership bench strength for a substantial competitive advantage. She is the author of multiple books, including Network Beyond Bias, Making a Diversity, oh, there it is, Making a Diversity a Competitive Advantage for Your Career. Amy is a professional member of the National Speakers Association and a proxy certified change practitioner. Her other credentials include 2 degrees from Indiana University and a world's best mom coffee mug. So let's dive right on in. Cara, I'll let you kick us off.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks, Maggie. And we are going to tackle a really important topic today. So I'm so excited to have Amy, who's been a friend and fellow speaker for years, to come on and talk about specifically bias and what biases do we have, how do we move beyond our biases, right? It's almost impossible to, I think, eliminate them because of the exposure you have and what you've been raised with and who you were raised by and things like that. But I love how she positions this with her clients and her messages as how do we move beyond that bias that we know we all have. So we are living in a crazy world right now, right? Some people are still in quarantine. Some states have opened up, and in those states, some people are still quarantining and others are not. And it's causing a lot of stress. And I think more than anything, and I don't know about you, Amy, but I'm seeing a lot of judgment, whether it's about, COVID-related things, the mask wearing and not wearing masks, or it is a lot of this social unrest that we're seeing and the cause for justice across our country in so many different ways, and really people rising up to that occasion to no longer be silent. So I think I have seen on my news feed tons and tons of people asking for resources. How do I learn? How do I get better? How do I move beyond this bias that I now know I have, but I still don't really fully understand it or know what to do about it? So super excited to have Amy talk about all of this with us today. And Amy, if you'll unmute for us, I'd like to start with what exactly is implicit bias. We hear that versus, I guess the opposite is explicit bias. Can you talk just about that terminology and what we're going to be diving into today?
Sure. So let's start with explicit bias. There's a lot of that right now too. And I want to go back to something you said before I even address any of this. I want to go back to something you said, which is, people are stressed, they're insecure, right? Because there's a lot of unknowns. We're all facing this world that we don't recognize right now in the middle of a pandemic. Very few people alive have ever been through something like this. And it's when we are stressed, when we feel threatened, either physically or mentally, or we're getting tired, right, from all of these stress stimuli. that our brains tend to go more on autopilot. And instead of making our worldview bigger, our brains go, nope, can only focus on this right now. And all of those shortcuts that we're used to taking really take center stage, because all of the peripheral part of our brain that would be kind of reminding us to like expand our focus just a little bit is busy worried about like COVID and is the store open and will they have bread and, you know, can I get coffee because Starbucks here doesn't open till 9 now, which is stupid. So anyway, so, you know, all this other stuff that we have to worry about takes us away from the work that we would all probably like to be doing in, you know, learning and expanding and growing right now. You know, everybody said we'll go in quarantine, we'll all come out with books. I don't know very many people that have come out with a book. But let's talk about all of that to say, let's talk about what is implicit bias. And I tend to use the word unconscious bias. Unconscious or implicit, kind of the same thing. Let's be really clear. Bias means a preference for or against. That's it. We all have it, right? I have a bias toward vanilla ice cream, vanilla bean ice cream in particular, over other flavors, right? I have a bias toward red cars as opposed to gray ones, right? Like we all have this. Now, that's not a problem, right? Our biases aren't necessarily a problem if we're not using them to hurt other people. But what happens is we tend to gravitate toward things that we prefer, and we do it so often without thinking that then our biases become unconscious. And so let me give you an example. Back when we could meet with people, I used to ask when I'd be in a room full of folks, right? I'd be up on the stage and there'd be tables everywhere. How many of you sat with somebody you know? And everybody's hand would go up. You're at a networking event. Why are you sitting with people you know? Get up, switch seats, right? But we go where we're comfortable and we do it automatically. And we do that in any new situation. If you walked into a room and you saw another woman with blonde hair with purple streaks, I almost guarantee you'd go talk to her because you think, wow, I've got a lot in common with her. Right?
Already. Yeah.
Already.
Haven't even talked to her. I know we do.
Yeah. So, you know, it's those things that we do without thinking about it. And then when somebody says, well, why did you sit at this table? Why are you talking to this person and not that person? Why did you hire, you know, Joe for your team and not Jose? What, you know, and on and on and on. And then when we really start to examine these things that we didn't think about, and we realize, oh, this doesn't really stand up to any level of scrutiny that I'm comfortable with, we get more insecure and more defensive, and we start to go back to those narrow biases again, right? Because we feel threatened. So what I want to challenge people to do is to welcome that scrutiny, because it's through those conversations about, well, why did you make that choice? Why do you always pick this flavor of ice cream and not that flavor of ice cream? Why do you always talk to this kind of person? You know, why do you go to this kind of business or whatever? Think about it, disrupt those patterns, and ask, does it really make sense? Is it still serving me? And if the answer is no, it's okay to change.
Doesn't that even apply to, you know, a lot of people are working from home now, and their preference or bias was to be at the office. And now I know some people who thought, oh, I could never work from home. And now they're saying, I don't ever want to go back into an office. But it was challenged, right? They had to go out of their comfort zone to even try the other thing. Of course, some people have tried working from home, hate it, and they're like, okay, I can't wait to get back to the office, right? So it could be lots of different things like that where we show that bias or preference. Now, so is there a difference between bias and preference, or is that nearly a synonym?
Yeah, I think they're synonymous.
Okay. Gotcha. So then what about the word prejudice? Is that synonymous with bias?
Well, you know, prejudice is a little different. We can have good prejudices and bad prejudices, right? Just like you would have a good prejudice toward another blonde lady with a purple streak in her hair, right? You'd give her the benefit of the doubt.
She's got to be great, right?
Got to be great. And so you would give her the benefit of the doubt, right? You're prejudging her as a good person, someone who's like you, right?
Yep, that's true.
And so, you know, when we judge people as like us, or as, you know, we kind of give them the benefit of the doubt, they can get by with a lot more, which isn't always good for them or for us. But, you know, the prejudices that get us into the most trouble are when we make judgments about somebody because of some group that they belong to, because of some belief that they hold, because of, you know, an accent or a lazy eye or the color of their skin or whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
we take this one or two things that we know about them and we fill in the whole
Right.
rest of the story
Mm-hmm.
without getting to know that person. And I think that's where our biases and our prejudices really get us into trouble, because it puts up this wall between us and other people that then we can't connect on a human level.
Okay.
Get back on audio here.
There we go.
I've seen in some cases where really the bias is, you know, sometimes like you said, we're just trying to process all the information that we have right now. And then I've seen sometimes when people just gravitate to that comfort level because that's what I know. And isn't it true that people gravitate toward people who look and think like they do, you know, like the blonde hair, purple streak, right? If I see somebody like that, I am definitely going to go over and say, hi, hey, I love your hair. And,
Yeah.
you know, that kind of thing. So I heard at a conference one time, something that really hit home for me was that they looked at their hiring practices, for example, and they realized that their whole staff, it was a lot of people that looked very similar and had a very similar outlook, and they were hiring for fit. You know, does that person fit into our culture and how we do things here? And then it became so homogenous that everybody really looked the same and thought the same. And they thought that was a really good thing. But over time, they realized that they didn't have the diversity they need: diversity of thought, diversity of mindset, racial diversity, gender diversity, you know, all these different things that would really make them a much stronger organization. And instead of hiring friends of friends and just doing that easy process of, oh, well, they're already vetted, because if my person on staff already knows them, then they must be good people. You know, I don't have to vet them as much because somebody knows them.
Mm-hmm.
And the CEO said that they have had to slow down their hiring process, that if they do not have any people of color, for example, that have applied, or not a strong enough percentage, then they will purposefully repost and go look for more candidates and things like that. And he said it's really impacted their hiring processes, but also their diversity, because they were more intentional about that and told the managers to set this bias aside of hiring people. Oh, she finishes my sentences. She, you know, reminds me so much of myself. You know, I cringe because that's one of the triggers, right? That should be a trigger.
Yeah.
If you think, oh, this person reminds me so much of myself, we have to be careful that we are not, you know, doing that laser beam focus of view and lens instead of a much more inclusive, open lens. Is that
Absolutely? So I'm going to share two examples, one story and one example. So I was reading a story about a CEO who was looking to fill a key role on his team. And the recruiter kept sending him resume after resume after resume after resume. He threw all of them out. He didn't like any of them. And she went back to him and she said, okay, what exactly are you looking for? And he said, I want somebody who's an Eagle Scout. And she said, okay, talk to me about that. Why is that important? And he starts listing off all the traits that Eagle Scouts would have. And then she explained to him, okay, that means you're going to get, you know, like 1 out of every 100,000 candidates is an Eagle Scout. And there are people who are not Eagle Scouts who have those traits, but you're throwing hundreds of good candidates in the trash.
Not to mention women who can't be Eagle Scouts.
All women, and pretty much anybody who didn't grow up either in the country or the suburbs, right? So you're talking about, you know, I mean, it's like you think about all of the racial and gender implications of what a good employee was to this man that he was disregarding because they weren't already an Eagle Scout.
Yeah.
Now, then that brings me to my other thing. I've noticed that companies do a lot of box checking, right? Are they from the right school? Do they have the right major? Do they have the right experience? Do they work at the right companies? if it's startups, did they work at the right startups? If it's banks, did they work at the right banks? Do they work at the right management firms? Do they work at this? Check box, check box, check the box, check the box, all the way down the page, right?
Yeah.
What you end up with is 50 people who probably graduated from the same school in about the same 5-year time span, who were all in the same fraternity.
That's a big one. That's a big one.
Right. And then they all got there because of networking. And then what do? They get them there and they say, we're going to think outside the box.
But we all came from the same box.
But we all came from the same box. Now, if you really want to think outside of the box, bring people from different boxes.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why I think diversity of thought is it's a real trigger word for a lot of people in the diversity and inclusion space, because a lot of times companies will say, well, we have diversity of thought, which means, Bob wears a blue tie and Steve wears a red tie and Jim never wears a tie. So they're different. And it's just not the same, right? It's not the same as having people with vastly different lived experiences, with vastly different perspectives.
Yeah.
Most of us, almost every industry is facing a market shift in terms of who their customer demographics are, because our society is changing, right? Where we have the Black and brown population in this country is growing much faster than the white population. So we're hitting these different demographic groups.
Yeah.
Right. So you're not going to market the same way that you did 30 years ago. Your customer is not the same as they were 30 years ago. And your workforce, the pool from which you're selecting your workers, is different. So if you're still trying to check the same boxes you did 30 years ago, you are really limiting your talent pool, your ability to innovate, and your ability to connect with your customers. And I see Robert says he's an Eagle Scout. Congratulations, Robert. I know how much work that is.
Yes.
And that there are women who will become Eagle Scouts. And I know that there was a lot of kerfuffle in the scouting world about that. But yes, absolutely. And I'm not discounting the value of the Eagle Scout designation. I'm just saying there are a lot of folks who don't have the opportunity to be Eagle Scouts.
Right. And aren't Scouts in general very heavily white? I mean,
and that I don't know, but I'm just saying, like, when you put up a proxy, right? When you put up some artificial, even in your own mind, right? You put up some artificial criteria because of your own bias, right? I prefer Eagle Scouts because I know Eagle Scouts. Right. Well, that limits a whole lot of people.
Yes. Yes. Well, so, okay, Amy, and we're not bashing Eagle Scouts at all.
No, not at all.
In fact, that's a threshold. People really, really respect that because they know how hard it is to be an Eagle Scout. So that's a threshold they feel like they have accomplished, similar to if they have a degree or a master's or, something like that. So, okay, Amy, tell me, I'm just going to put myself out there. So I got my MBA at University of Louisville, and I did specifically the entrepreneurship MBA. And I have never been a part of a fraternity, sorority, Greek system like that in the past, but I do feel like anytime I meet someone else from the entrepreneurial MBA program from U of L, even if I've never met them, it's like an instant connection. Oh, you were an EMBA grad? Oh, were you EMBA 15 or EMBA 20 or EMBA 5? Like, it feels, I think, like that Greek life and that connection that people have. So of course I'm going to immediately, just like the chick with blonde hair and a purple streak, that I'm going to find that connection with. Then
your endorphins kick in. You feel good.
But what do I do? So if I've got candidates, and then of course this person is a front runner because I know that program's hard. It's hard to get into, the challenges they have to go through and the level they come out at and all of that. How do I move past that bias in my hiring if, of course, that person's kind of the front runner because of that thing, whether it's an Eagle Scout or that U of L MBA or something like that? What do we do to get past that bias, or how am I supposed to react to it now?
Sure. So I have a whole book on hire beyond bias, which is like all the steps in your process that can trip you up.
Ooh, okay, good.
So that's like a whole thing. But let me just say this. If you start out with objective criteria that you are willing to share with your candidates, with your team, and you say, this is how we're going to select, this is who we're looking for. These are the skills, these are the experiences, these are the criteria.
Okay.
And if you're not keeping that a secret, And
that's a good thing to keep in mind, because
yeah.
was that guy willing to put must be an Eagle Scout
Oh, of course not.
on the job description, right? So good. So if we're willing to say out loud what the criteria is, okay, go on.
And hold ourselves to it. And, you know, the other kind of the best thing I think that we can do is to redact resumes. So you can have somebody take a black Sharpie and cross out everything but the person's initials, right? About what their name is, because we know for a fact that Joe gets more calls than Jose, right? Tim gets.
Let me preface that real quick, guys. SHRM, the National Society of HR Managers, they do a study every year where they send the same resumes out to companies with what they call a white sounding name and a black sounding name, or someone that's not white, a person of color. And it is proven that the exact same resumes, the white names, get more calls for interviews than the other. So please do not act like the discrimination is gone and the bias is gone and things like that. So that's what she's referring to. There is study after study, year after year, that stuff still exists in 2019, 2020. It's craziness, but it is happening. So I get what you're saying.
If you redact the names, right? Take the name out of it.
Okay.
Take the school out of it. If somebody has an MBA, they worked hard for that MBA. And it doesn't matter whether they got it from U of L or Stanford. If the requirement is an MBA, that's it, right?
Well, now some people would argue that.
I agree, but you have to be clear about what is it that you want and why is that important.
Okay.
And so if an MBA is important, fine. If an MBA from Stanford is important, I think you've got some splaining to do.
Okay.
Right?
Then you need to say maybe even an MBA from an Ivy League school, or a top performer from an MBA program. It can't just be an MBA, but they have to have met yet another threshold that you're willing to write down and put out there. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then, have multiple people score resumes, because then you'll start to see some other biases that creep up. Because if you think you've got objective criteria and you give 10 resumes to 5 people, and those 5 people come back with much different rankings, chances are your scoring mechanism is not as objective as you think.
I hear you.
So, and I know Robert in the chat says, why do people have a college graduation date as a required field? Yeah, I don't know. And, that's another thing, the years, right? The graduation years can be used against people because, they're too young for this job, or they're too old for this job, or focus on skills.
Absolutely. Yeah. I do think for years there was bias toward having certain degrees and whatnot. And I actually have seen a swing of the pendulum. I'll use IT for an example. Even if you are an IT person and you have 20 years of computer programming experience, if you didn't keep up with the new languages that have come out, your 20 years of experience might be obsolete at this point, and someone brand new who does know Python or, some of the newer languages and things, they might be better off. In fact, I worked with a guy years ago at an IT company who he was self-taught on all these programming languages, but he didn't have a degree. And so most places that he would apply, it would just kick him out and say, you're not qualified, you're not qualified, you're not qualified. This dude is brilliant. He taught himself 15 languages, programming languages, all by himself. And then the moment he got his degree, Apple hired him because that's how smart he was. He just went straight to the top of the pack of IT companies because he was so brilliant. But so many companies overlooked him that could have had him during that time. And I do see more IT companies just asking, what do you know how to program? What are your skills? What languages do you speak on programming and whatnot, instead of caring whether they actually have a degree in it. And some places are now doing micro degrees, or I think they call them nano degrees, especially in the IT world. And that's more relevant than a 4-year liberal arts degree or something else, which I have a 4-year liberal arts degree.
Right. Sometimes a skills test is a better determinant than, rather than a degree. Or, people say, well, I don't care what they have a degree in so long as they have a degree. Okay, well, if you don't care what it's in, why do you care? like there's a lot of assumptions that go into that, right? Into that person's upbringing, into where they're from, into how they were raised. And, you know, there are a lot of people with really good life experience and really good work experience and incredible skill sets that don't have a piece of paper, right? That they paid $50,000 or $200,000 for. So I think if you just ask yourself why, or have somebody else challenge you on the why, right? Why is this important to you? Why did you make this decision? You know, why these criteria? Again, welcome that scrutiny, because it takes you away from this into this, and you're going to have more possibilities. Now, I think a lot of times in the hiring process, we want this because we're so afraid we're going to make a mistake. And we think, okay, well, if we just check all the boxes, we'll get the perfect candidate. And I think we need to
cover our tail, right?
Right. Yeah, that too, right? And then my boss will be mad at me because I did everything they said. But, you know, I think the more we can stop with the kind of, you know, the jockeying for position, right? Like, okay, this and this and this and this and this, and then just a little bit wider, and let's be more thoughtful instead of just relying on what we've always done, because what we've always done is not working anymore.
Correct. So, okay, we've talked about hiring and stuff. I could talk about that for hours. What about just on a team or in life? Like, where is the bias showing up? And let's keep it, if we can, kind of business related for business leaders and team members at work with colleagues. Where else is bias showing up that I need to be careful and kind of check myself and whatnot?
Oh my gosh, everywhere, Cara. I mean, every decision you make that you don't realize you're making comes from a desire to be comfortable, right? An unstated desire to be comfortable. And so, you know, I would even say, if everybody were at the end of this call to make a list of the last 5 business books you read, because most of us, if you're spending your lunch hour on a webinar, you probably read, you're probably a learner, you probably list the last 5 books you read, look up the authors. Do you have a good mix of men and women? Do you have a good mix across race and ethnicity? Do you have a good mix across industry? Or, you know, did you read like 5 books by Seth Godin? Because you're not getting diverse ideas if you're reading 5 books by Seth Godin, right? But if you're reading a book by Seth Godin and a book by Minda Harts and a book by, you know,
Amy Waninger,
and a book, a book by Amy Waninger, right? And you're getting your ideas and your information and you're learning from different sources. Now you've gone from here to here, right? And you also start to see, I saw somebody in the chat saying, well, yeah, but we just trust people who are like us. Well, we do. We trust people who are in our in-group. And if you can take your in-group from here to here, and you can build trust across those differences, now you have more people that you can trust because you see them as individuals. You recognize, you know, nuance in the discussion. You recognize that this woman's experience is different from this woman's experience, or this Black woman's experience is different from this Black woman's experience, or this Black disabled queer woman's experience is different from this Black disabled queer woman's experience, right? So we can get really deep in this, but the more you make it an intentional effort to follow thought leaders and to read the stories and read the experiences, or, you know, even to engage, you know, in person or online with people who are vastly different from you. And if you do that at a critical mass, you're going to get a more nuanced perspective from what you used to see as this sort of monolithic other group, right? And now it's not, you know, some Latina woman, right? It's Maria Jose and her experience. And it's different.
Yeah, that you just blew my mind, Amy, when you said, let's take your inner circle from here to here, because I was thinking just my lens, right? That I just need to see things instead of being, you know, tunnel vision. I need to see things like this, but I don't just need to see it. I need to trust people all the way to here. I need to expand that circle and my network and my understanding, my exposure, my, my conversations with people, all of that. That to me is a huge tip for people to really take the blinders off and move that forward.
Well, you can't live all these lives. You can only live this life.
True.
So if you want to understand what all this is, you're going to have to connect with people who have a different experience from you.
Yes. And I find that we call it the Goldilocks theory, that people really are comfortable where they are, like on a spectrum. So, we do a lot of generational work, and we'll say, well, there's a traditional mindset and a millennial mindset, and you're somewhere on the spectrum. And wherever you are, even if you're down here like me on the millennial side, I see myself as Goldilocks. Like I'm the
You're
normal
just right.
one. Yeah, I'm just right. That's the phrase. I'm just right. Wherever you fall, even if you're in the middle, you think the people on either end are ridiculous or crazy or from another planet or whatnot. And I see that play out every single day, whether it is racial conversations, generational conversations, wearing mask conversations, anything like that. Wherever you are on that spectrum or, in that space, then we tend to see it our way. Yeah. And I'm trying so hard to expand that. I'm trying to read more books that I've never read or even thought about reading in the past, learning different experiences, listening, right? Listening is huge because if you're talking, you can't be listening. So you got to shut up and do that. Yeah. What's up?
So as an exercise, I would like for everybody in the chat, if you were on a highway right now, if you were on a highway, not if you are on a highway, if you are on a highway, don't chat. But if you were driving down the highway and the speed limit was 65 miles an hour, how fast would you be driving? Assuming that you didn't see a police officer
65.
anywhere. If the 65 right now, just as quick as you can, how fast, what would your cruise be set on? So I'm seeing 65, 69, 68, 70, 75. I saw an 80. I am willing to bet that if you went through that list, everybody with a number higher than you is a maniac, and everybody with a number lower than you is a moron.
Yes. Yes. Come on, Grandpa, find the gas. That is exactly true. That is a perfect example of the Goldilocks methodology, that anyone going faster or slower than you is crazy. So yes. And I
think we hit a nerve.
Yes. So here's what's funny is I have used a similar example in some of our trainings that I was raised. So let's talk about how we were raised. I was raised, my father told me that in our area, you'll never get pulled over if you're not going, if you're going 10 over or less. Right? If you're going 10 over, more than 10 over, you should get pulled over and you should get a ticket. But my own father, when I was learning to drive, he said, you should pretty much stay around the speed limit up to 10 over. So I purposefully set my cruise control on all my road trips to 9 over. That's where I set it, because to me, that's what everybody should be driving. And of course, always, other people are saying, no, you're speeding, you're going too fast. And then other people are still flying past me at 9 over. So it really is about your upbringing, that exposure. What did mentors or parents tell you? What did television tell you? I mean, Amy, how much of our bias, especially the unconscious bias, how much of that is coming from television shows, movies, media, things like that? What are some thoughts or examples on that?
Pretty much from the moment we're born, we are inundated with messages about who we are relative to other people. Right. And it's interesting because, there's certainly media portrayals, and I'll give you just one very simple example. I can tell if there's like a mass, like if there's a highly publicized event of violence, let's say somebody's shot. I can tell without watching TV, I can tell without ever seeing the mugshot of the shooter, the race of that shooter. Because what they will say, what the news people will say is, this happened, whatever. And then if they talk about the shooter's family or their job, that shooter's white. They humanize the assailant immediately.
Oh.
And it's interesting. I've actually I don't ever watch TV. I listen to it sometimes when it's on, but I don't watch unless, I get curious and then I peek my head around the wall or whatever. And it will almost always, that is almost always the case. And if there's a victim, I can tell the race of the victim by whether they go to past offenses or the family they leave behind. And if you just, put a Post-it note over your TV when you're watching the news on the place where they put the mugshots up, and you will 99% of the time be able to predict the race of the assailant and the victim. And so it's little things like that, right? And, but these things lodge in us. I mean, all of these experiences that we have, everything that we observe sticks itself in our brain somewhere. And I remember, I don't know if you saw the movie Black Panther, but it was a Marvel movie and it was super fun. And stuff blowing up, and they had the really sweet Lexus in the car chase, right? But Youre, the sister of King T'Challa, was the scientist, right? And I remember watching that movie. I was like, oh my God, it was so cool. And I saw a woman, I was walking out of the theater, I saw a woman who looked a lot like the actress who played Shuri in the movie. And I was like, oh, I wonder if she's a scientist, right? Like that quick. And I was thinking, man, what a trip that was, right? Like I spent like 2 hours in this alternate universe and I immediately come out and go, oh, scientist, right?
With a new assumption.
With a new assumption about somebody I have no idea. Maybe she was a bank teller or a nuclear physicist. I have no idea. But I just instantly, right? And so, we have this, like you think about typecasting in movies, like we know what the doctor in a movie looks like. We know what the scientist in a movie looks like. We know what the bad guy looks like, right? The cartoons that we watch as kids, if they have really skinny, long faces and pointy eyebrows, they're the villain, right? Like always.
Yeah.
And so you can just look at these things and you take these visual cues. Well, then we take all of those patterns in. Our brains are really good at pattern matching. And then we apply all of those patterns to the real world where they don't apply. And so we have to be very critical about our thinking, about what we're consuming, how people are talking, and what images are we seeing. A
few examples come to mind for me. So, STEM, which is the science, technology, engineering, and math, there's been a huge push to get more women into that field because you didn't see examples in TV and commercials and ads for colleges and things like that. You didn't see women in those roles. So there weren't as many young girls kind of fantasizing about, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be an engineer, that type of thing. So there's been a push for that. I'm a big theater lover. I totally am infatuated with Hamilton and have been for years. So if you haven't seen it on Disney Plus, go get it.
Totally worth Disney Plus just for Hamilton.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they really shook things up because, of course, it's a story about Hamilton and our founding fathers, but most of the cast from the original Broadway series are people of color. And he did that on purpose. And so my father, who loves theater, he's honestly not a huge hip hop fan, he admitted, but he really loved watching the show, especially with the captions on, so he could really understand the storyline of what was going on. And he said, as soon as I knew which character was which, who was playing Hamilton, who's playing George Washington, color didn't matter to me. My brain took over to say, oh, that's George Washington and that's, Hamilton. So we can absolutely get past those things, even though for years, especially in theater and movies, we thought, well, that person has to look like this. Another movie that I saw not too long ago that addressed this, if you have ever seen the Spider-Man cartoon called Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, I think it's called, and it's about all different types of Spider-Man from different universes.
You have like a Porky Pig
They're
Spider-Man.
looking,
Yeah.
yes, but they're looking at one point, Amy, just like you were saying about the doctor or scientist, you know, those things. At one point, they're looking for Doc Ock, which in the comic book has always been a guy, but they're going through this lab, looking in windows, and then they go, there she is. And Spider-Man looks at the camera and says, I need to set my biases aside, because he was looking for a guy. He thought Doc Ock would be a guy. And in that movie, Doc Ock is a female. So I do think movies, TV, commercials, we're seeing tons of mixed race couples now on commercials and TV shows. I think a lot of that is changing. But if you think about, back from a generational standpoint, if you were raised in a time when the guy in the black hat was the bad guy and the guy in the white hat was the good guy in almost every show, even Back to the Future, we were watching with my son recently, and one of the bad guys, he was a white actor, but they made him real dark and dirty and dark clothing. You know, they went with that stereotype of the bad guy. And so if you were raised in a time where that was your exposure, it is going to do something to your head, right? It's going to make those wires work in a very certain way. So think Star Wars to challenge the balance. Yeah, absolutely. There were certainly,
right? I mean, it's
there
so
were
explicit.
certainly things that do that. Yeah, light side, dark side. Exactly. Chris said women are now in STEM education at a higher rate than men, but they don't stay in their career due to the lack of inclusion. I've seen so much of that. In fact, I have a speaker friend, Heidi, who she only speaks about women in engineering to address that exact issue and those stereotypes and bias and assumptions and all of that. So yes. Financial advisors, mostly white males. Yes, absolutely. Even in Disney movies. Exactly. Okay, so before we run out of time here, because I know this conversation is going quickly and we're having a lot of fun, what strategies, Amy, do you have? Because now we get it. Like, crap, I'm aware. I know what's
programmed,
happening.
and now you're aware
coming
of the
from.
programming. So how do we deprogram? So a couple of things. Whatever industry you're in, go find people who don't look like you and who don't look like your boss and follow them on social media. Right? So if you are in a white-dominated, male-dominated industry, go find Latino men, Black women, people with disabilities, whatever the thing is, right, that's different from you, different from your boss, different from your CEO. Go find thought leaders in your industry and follow them on social media. Just listen. Listen. Second thing is, go where you're not expected. Not where you're not welcome, but where you're not expected. So every industry has a Black something association in the industry. Every industry has a women in whatever industry association. Every industry has a Latinos in this industry association. Every single one. Go there. Go to the one that's not for you. Go to the Black Chamber of Commerce. Go to the Gay Chamber of Commerce. Sit down and listen to people talking about their experiences in a way that that's not set up for you, and just listen, right? So they're not there to explain it to you. They're there to talk. You're there to listen. Take notes. Google the terms you need to look up later. Don't ask them in the moment, but take notes just like you would if you were, in a new job and you went to the meeting the first day, right? You'd be like taking notes furiously, and then you'd go back and you'd figure out like, what does this acronym mean, right? Same thing. Go out there, listen to people that you haven't heard before. Read books by people you don't know, right? Read books by people who don't look like you. And then, if I may, not just to plug my book, but my book, Network Beyond Bias, really lays out how to do this exactly. Which is
it's great.
To say, okay, here's who's in my inner circle. And I control that, right? I control who I have coffee with, who I have lunch with, who I mentor, who mentors me. I control what books I read, what podcasts I listen to, all of that. Get intentional about that inner circle. Because when you start to hear stories, when you start to care about people and you hear their stories and you care about them more, then you start to care about their stories. And something changes inside of you where your in-group goes from here to here.
Mm-hmm.
And I always tell people your heart can't be in the right place if you don't move your feet.
Yes.
Move your feet. Go somewhere different. Show up for somebody in a way that you haven't before. Because it's not until we do that, right? All of our good intentions don't mean squat. Everybody thinks they're a good person.
Mm-hmm.
So don't tell people you're a good person. Show up that way.
Absolutely. I cannot say that over and over and over again. Just because your heart is in the right place and you are a good person, right now, that's not enough, especially as a business leader. Everybody on this call today is a business leader, and we have got to move our feet. We've got to take action. We have to change some of those processes, change some of those policies. We have to maybe change where we're going for our networking events and things like that. Where are we hiring?
Who's
different
catering?
Resources. Yeah.
Right, like little things.
What's
like
that?
Like who's catering? Like who do you hire when you have an event? Are you hiring a chain, or are you hiring a local small business? Are you,
yes.
Are you looking in, for example, maybe there's an Asian American Chamber of Commerce or an Asian Chamber of Commerce in your area. And maybe, they could be your supplier for your office supplies, somebody from that
yes.
group, right? Maybe you go to the Black Chamber of Commerce and that's where you find your insurance agent, right? Like, be intentional, because if it's like you and the people in the 4 houses around you, it's not enough. It's just not enough. And you're never going to break out of this pattern. You're never going to create new patterns.
Yes, absolutely. I would also take it to another level too about mentoring. Who are you mentoring? Because that's one that is very natural to say, oh, she reminds me of a young me, or he reminds me of a young me. And that's often how those informal mentoring relationships happen. And I encourage you to find folks who don't have mentors already or don't have access to mentors already, and people that don't remind you of you and instead have a totally different background and a totally different upbringing instead. So I learned a lot from having a mentor. I have several mentees. I'm sorry, I meant mentee. I have several mentees who aren't anything like me. And a lot of times, even though I may be helping them build their speaking career or getting through college or, however I've been connected with them as a mentor, I am going to learn something else about myself and about life, even though I'm an expert in what they came to me for. But in those conversations, it's really going to expand that lens, expand my inner circle. And I learned so much more about other people's perspectives and challenges in the world, for example. So I really would like to challenge you to, look at the practices within your organization, certainly expand your networking. And Amy has a great kind of framework for that. And she has this chart that you can fill out and really test yourself on how, how biased is your network and your networking efforts. So definitely get a copy of the book and you get that, that framework as part of that. But yeah, also go to kind of the mentoring level and all different areas of your professional relationships. What does that look like? So yeah, if you have not already worked with Amy, she's fantastic at training organizations, speaking at conferences. I've seen her several times. That's why I brought her here into the Magnet Culture family to come share with our followers this expertise. Definitely get her book. I think we popped it into the chat there, as well as her website, leadatanylevel.com. Of course, we work mostly on reducing employee turnover at Magnet Culture, which was called Crescendo Strategies. But this leadership piece is really critical, because if you don't get this bias piece right and really proactively tackle the diversity conversations and the gaps that we're now identifying and seeing, it will cause you retention problems later if it is not already, because people don't feel included. They don't feel like it is a welcome environment, and heaven forbid they feel like tokenized. You know, like, oh, well, they hired me because they needed somebody who's Black on staff, you know, and then they may be treated that way as well, which I've seen several times. We had a webinar a few weeks ago with our friend Demetria Miles McDonald about race. Amy knows Demetria as well. And if you missed that session that we did, it's on our YouTube page. And we'll send out the link to both this recording and that recording after the session, because that was an excellent talk as well, right in the heat of the social conversations around race that were happening across the country. So,
and I want to go
Amy,
really quickly to what you were saying, Cara, because going back to that whole check the box exercise, right? If you've spent the last 30 years in your organization finding people who check all the boxes, and now you bring in somebody who doesn't, that's an act of violence. That person cannot,
wait, what do you mean?
I mean, that person cannot come in and feel safe and be successful by themselves.
Okay.
And so
what do we do?
You need to do is you need to work on your culture, and maybe you open up, you know, maybe you wait till you have 3 positions and you bring in 3 people who are outside of those boxes, because one person is going to be isolated. They're going to be shut out actively. They're going to be sabotaged probably by their coworkers and their boss because they don't fit the mold. And then what's going to happen is when they leave, you're going to tell yourself, well, we tried that and it just didn't work. And that's not good enough.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. For some reason looks like I got bumped out, but I didn't. Okay, good. No, that is excellent advice. So don't you think that we need training on this stuff across the entire organization? I mean, obviously leadership training to make changes and change policies and whatnot, but all staff training and awareness of these biases and our different perspectives, diversity of all different types, right? What that really means. I think we need to start with that kind of training and awareness even before anyone who is different would come into the organization. Absolutely. To make sure that we are prepared to be inclusive, that people know what that means. And I know you have some great activities in your workshops that I've been a part of helping people feel included, finding out from individuals what makes you feel included, you know, those types of things. So before we go, do you have one final kind of thought or a piece of advice or just overarching wisdom that you'd like to share with us as we kind of wrap up here?
But no,
I know we could do this for days.
I know, and I do. But no, I think the one thing that I want people to take away, we all think our heart's in the right place. Every person I've ever met says, my heart's in the right place. I'm not sure what we're supposed to do about this, right? It's like, you know, like, what am I supposed to do? And just every time you think, well, I'm a good person, that doesn't apply to me. I know enough about that. I don't need to learn anymore. I want you to remember that your heart cannot be in the right place if you never move your feet. And I want everybody who's listening to move their feet, because it's moving our feet that makes change. And thank you, Mamie. That is so sweet of you. Mamie is one of my favorite clients. And she, I went to her campus in Michigan, and thank you so much. That was so sweet, Dr. Thorns. I really appreciate you.
Yeah. And a great question from Peggy before we go here, Amy. Peggy asked, what if you are the token person in the organization? Is there anything that you can do besides drop a copy of Amy's book on the boss's desk? What can you do? You know, because oftentimes it's really hard to get people to listen. You know what I mean? If you're the person that you want them to listen to, but they're not listening. So
it's impossible.
What do we do?
Yeah. So when you feel like you're a token, and God, I'm so sorry. First of all, if that's how you're feeling, Peggy, I am so sorry. Because it's so lonely and it's so hard. My strategy for that has always been, you know, because I was a woman in tech for 20 years. So, you know, going back to our earlier conversation, my strategy has always been find one good ally who's part of the majority. And if you can find one good ally and build trust over time, and it's so hard, it's so much work, I know, but if you can find one good ally who can step in and say, you know, I'm sorry, Peggy, you didn't get to finish what you were saying earlier in the meeting. Could you finish your thought? Right?
Yes.
Or, you know, whatever the thing is, right, that's troubling you. If you have that one ally that can kind of do that work for you, and then maybe you get another one, right? Or have them identify or hold some people accountable. And going back to your mentoring thing, Cara, you know, in organizations, you know, the white men in the organization, the pyramid's like this, right? It's pretty narrow. You got people pretty evenly, like there's still a pyramid, but there's not nearly as many at the bottom percentage wise as at the top, right? And then if you go to like the black women in the organization, you might have one that's like middle manager or senior leader,
but a lot more,
but a lot at the bottom. And so now if that one black woman, if that one black woman is responsible for mentoring this entire area under her of people that look like her, that is too much. And what I would say is if you're in this organization and you're part of it, find one of these black women to mentor you in her lived experience, and then commit to take what you learn and go mentor 5 black women in your area of expertise, understanding what their lived experience is.
There we go. Oh, that's fantastic. That's a great visual that really opens up my eyes of what those opportunities are, you know. So fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for being here. You can check out magnetvault.com is where our retention resources are. And then you've got Lead at Any Level. You can jump on Amy's list if you're not already on her list of great tips and tricks and videos and things like that. So follow both of us on LinkedIn. We'd love to connect with you as well to stay in touch. And you guys have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. And we will continue these conversations. So stay tuned for our next Flash webinar. Thank you so much, Amy Waninger. We love you.
Thank you, Cara. I love you too.